pressure too, and we might, if we have votes later, and we'll probably do that for approval of the minutes, to go ahead and put up the hand sign on your screen so that we can vote to approve the minutes. With that, would everyone click on their little hand sign so we can vote in support of approval of the minutes? Can you find the hand sign? So far, I have one vote.
Yeah, can you repeat the sign is?
Okay, we keep trying.
Okay,
Yeah, so the hand sign, if you open up the participant pane, that's a little silhouette of a person with 3 bars on it.
No.
The hand raise sign should be on the bottom right.
all right, we're getting there. Getting there. A few more. All right, we're going to deem that to be approved. Thank you all for voting, and you can now click on your hand sign to take that off so we know not to call on you for questions. We have today Supervisor Faust, who is joining us. And so before we get into the details of the meeting, I just want to open up the floor to him, welcome him to this meeting, which, you know, it's under unusual circumstances, but I think he's been doing a lot of these kinds of calls for the last several months, and he's an old hand at this. But welcome, Supervisor Faust, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you all. I just getting curious, I guess, and wanted to at least listen in for part of the meeting. Really can't exaggerate how much I appreciate the efforts that are being made. What the feedback I'm getting is really good. I know you're working so hard and it's just not as much fun as it used to be doing everything virtually, at least not in my world. So let me start there just with a huge thank you. And also, I just thought, getting some of the feedback, I would just, mention or go back in time to the community meetings we've had. I think, they were some of the best attended, some of the best participation I've seen in this type of effort, demonstrating, I think, how really passionate people are about seeing, I think, change in McLean for the better. I didn't sense that the passion was there to keep things as they are, clearly. And so, hopefully we can refer back to the thoughts and the community input that we got, clearly wanting to see change, but not necessarily development for development's sake, but development for the community's sake. Development that's going to deliver the types of amenities that we want to see in downtown McLean, which is going to take, obviously, serious development to get those types of things. And I know there's concern of maybe the issue is always incentivizing. Oh yeah, you can always get something if you're willing to give away the shop. What you have to do is find the right balance. And I think Streetscape did a pretty good job of, projecting what the market would be in downtown McLean if we pursued some, I would say, reasonable levels of density increases. Some would say excessive, and others would say not enough. But it's a balancing act. And I just want you to know that we're not in this alone at this point. The Board of Supervisors is focusing on, economic development and not economic development, always focus on that, I think, but on revitalization as part of our economic development strategy. And some of you may know, maybe all of you know, that the board is considering a really aggressive tax abatement program that I think is going to really make a difference for areas like downtown McLean. It will only apply to areas like downtown McLean, the revitalization districts. And we have the revitalization districts, then we have something else that 2 or 3 other areas of the county are part of that are also part of this package that the tax abatement program will apply in. And it's really a 10-year tax abatement on all increased value associated with the redevelopment. And there's other conditions like encouraging consolidation and so forth. But it's these types of things, you know, we're not going to be out there alone as we try to do this. There's, you know, there is help coming in terms of policy changes and priorities that the county board is trying to focus on. So with that, I probably already talked too long. I just want to say again, you know, having done what you've done, it's been a long time. I know how tough it is to find the time, and I know, you know, how difficult it is to work your way through all this stuff. So, you know, on behalf of the entire McLean community, I just want to thank you, and I really look forward to seeing the final product. Back to you, Kim.
All right, thank you so much, Supervisor. It has been a long time, actually. So I was thinking about Johanna when she first started working on the task force with us was 8.5 months pregnant, and her child is now almost 2.5 years old. Not is a, you know, well, it's probably ready for elementary school, you know, and that's how long we've been at this. So really appreciate all the time that the task force members have been working on this, and appreciate very much their diligence to this. So I wanted a couple of things as we go forward tonight. One is we're going to try to avoid getting bogged down in all the language that we did last time, to only go 9 pages, including a map, in 2.5 hours. I just don't think is acceptable to most of the task force members. So one of the reasons we had wanted, that is to say staff and myself wanted to have people's comments and edits in early, was to see if we can't get some of this wordsmithing done and sort of leave it to, because some of it really is pretty minor. Some people have found typos or maybe some improvements to language, and I'll by all means ask questions about clarifying terms or language, what exactly the language suggests in this particular paragraph or line. But let's try and not get into the wordsmithing, but to leave the little details if we can, if we think it's more of a matter of style than content, to the staff and let them do that first of all. And because I'm going to leave it to the staff discretion at this point in time whether or not they move this paragraph from this page to a different page. I don't think we need to get into that discussion. The other things I wanted to mention is, one, the staff has compiled a chart that looks at all the changes that have been made to the draft since the draft first came out. So we can tell at what point who suggested a comment and edit, and what the task force ended up doing. So if you are interested in that document, curious about it, talk to Jen, who has maintained that for the county and for this project. The second thing to mention is that what we're working on at this point is a document representing the task force, but it is also a document that will also include the different points of view the staff has on some of our decisions. So as you note, in the draft language, we have frequent references to a 2/3 acre public area when the task force has settled on only a 1/2 acre if it's less than 6 acres large for the new bonus density area. So task force decided what it wanted and it voted, but the staff believes that this is another option that the county planning commission, as well as the board of supervisors, will ultimately decide. So what we're doing is our best product, but understand also that some of this language is also language where there's going to be a bit of difference of opinion with the staff. So which is why we have some language in this document that reflects their position as well as our position. So we're not battling with them. They're going to be presenting this regardless of what we say. We're putting together our best effort, our best thoughts that will be presented to the county, and but also understand that this language also reflects what the staff has in the back of its mind in terms of best practices. So with that, I'd like to first begin with Jim Peoples. As you saw, again in the language, I want to thank people for getting their comments in on time to allow the staff to put together one document that included most everyone's comments. We had one that came in a little later, but everybody else's comments into one document that we can work off of. And so with that, to start with Jim Peoples' comment about the map. And then once we finish with Jim's issue, we're going to go on to the center zone discussion, which is page 10 of the first set of language that we're dealing with. So Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jim Peoples, and let you talk about your proposals and your ideas.
Well, I brought this up at the last meeting, and I detected that there was pretty much support for this, and that is that the area down on Holmes Place and also over on Emerson are right hard against single-family houses. In fact, the Emerson Place, which is in the if you go down to the parcel descriptions, is planned for commercial and light industrial uses, and it is now in fact townhouses. So there's a mismatch there. I think that whole area should be in the edge zone as opposed to the center zone, as well as the area along Holmes Place, which abuts brand new single family houses across the street. It would not preclude the development. It would just make it clear that we want to no more than 3 stories, which is what the center zone allows. So that's my proposal.
All right, thank you, Jim. So David, could you take us to the map there and show us the center zone map, which is, oh, I guess it's maybe the general zone or maybe not even that. It's probably, it presents a little bit bigger. I'm thinking, yeah, this is probably work. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so we're talking about where it has Bryn Mawr Park at the bottom of this map. And you see the dotted line that rolls around. Yeah, David's marking that. So Jim, your proposal is to then take how much and make it into a border for edge zone?
Well, I was proposing that we use a 75-foot edge zone along Holmes Place there, and the same thing on Emerson. If you look over there on Emerson, got a little teensy-tiny. Let's see here. Where's it? Where are we here on this thing? Ingleside, Whittier. Oh yeah. You don't even see Emerson on the map, but those are actually very small townhouses on very small lots, and the zone is coming up within 10 feet of their house.
All right, so So that's the proposal on the floor. Do we have any comments, questions, thoughts on this? All right, Rich.
I had advocated for this before. I don't think there should be any general zone properties adjacent to single family residences. So I would support Jim's idea.
All right, thank you. Any other comments, thoughts? All right, so those in support, click on your hands up signals.
I haven't been able to find the hand sign, so I got my hand up.
All right. If you're having problems with that, let me know. Okay, so at the end, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in support. Those opposed. So if you click down and click it off, or we're clearing the board. Okay, those in opposition to click on. Rich, you've got your hand up still, so if you take your hand down. Those in opposition to the proposal, if you would click on the hand sign. Okay, we have a number of folks apparently not voting, so okay, I guess the ayes have it, Jim. That addition is adopted. Okay, let's go on to now the discussion of the center zone. And so that starts page 10 and 11, and it goes into the start of page 12. So do we have the marked up version that was distributed to task force members on what, Friday morning? If we could look at that document to see what the comments are. All right.
The document's up.
So David, do you have that document that was distributed?
Yeah, the document up on the screen right now is the set that was distributed to the task force.
Okay, great. And so as I'm trying to roll up it, I should get my own copy because I don't have it right here with me. Are there topics that people want to discuss in the general zone? I mean, sorry, in the center zone? Any language changes, concepts that we're curious about, phrases we're unfamiliar with? All right, hearing nothing. Paul, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly, maybe staff can fill me in on this. The original draft had said that building heights are recommended to to be a maximum of 7 stories. And the text has been changed to suggest that a building's height is to range from 5 to 7 stories. And we just feel like it's unclear and would support reverting to the original language, which had a maximum height of 7 stories in the center zone and a maximum height of 5 stories in the general zone.
All right, Paul, I had to go get a copy of this for myself. Sorry about that. So your question was, why did we change the language from stories to height?
No, rather from a maximum height, which is clear, to a range of heights, which some could read to imply that a particular building within the center zone, for instance, would have to range between 5 and 7 stories within itself.
All right, staff want to answer?
Hi, this is Elizabeth Haig. Staff talked about this and we agreed we could go back to the language that takes out the ranges.
Great, thank you.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, so this is Derek. Obviously, you just mentioned that there's staff language and there's task force language, 2 concepts in that paragraph. Are we just leaving both in there for now, as noted, or are we voting on it again?
No, I think, I mean, our position is clear. And and staff is clear, right? So,
In both, and is what I'm hearing.
correct. Correct. It's just so we know what the other hand's doing. So the staff is telling us, you know, we would prefer something different, and they're just being straightforward about it, so. Okay, anything else in the center zone?
Yeah, Kim, we have one more thing that goes back to some language that had appeared in the vision and planning principles section. I'm sorry, I'm getting to the copy here. So we're all working off the same thing. Forgive me, just give me a few more seconds. The thrust of it is that there's a line in that section that says that residential uses should be multifamily, which is fine. But then it appends and are expected as part of mixed use development. And we worry that this would require any mixed use development to include a residential component. Again, we expect that most will, but we don't want to preclude you know, other interesting proposals that might not have residential as part of the use mix.
But if it
Yes.
says expected, why is that a problem? If it doesn't say required?
You know, I think it's the language is there for a reason. If it's not, if it's not an issue, it's not an issue. But we feel like if you're saying it's expected that it'll take, it prejudices any other development. It prejudices the language against approving any other type of development. We just don't see that it's destructive.
All right, Rich?
I guess I think that what Paul is getting at is, for example, is the Signet considered the new building at Signet considered a mixed use development? Probably not, because the new building is 100% residential. It's not mixed use. And would that be so bad? I think that's something I agree with Paul that I think it would not necessarily be inappropriate for it to be a multifamily, high-density residential structure that had perhaps very little, if any, ground floor retail. And that mixed use implies that it's part of a bigger development that may be more balanced between residential, office, and commercial.
This is Liz Hank. I think we can strike that as expected language unless some other staff corrects me otherwise, but I believe we can strike that.
All right, Rob, did you have a comment before we move on? Rob Jackson, your hand was up and you may be on mute.
Oh, I'm not opposed to it, but I'm not, you know, definitions of mixed use in the way we look at projects include residential buildings with street level retail. What happened here? So, you know, I'm not so worried about this language.
All right. Rob, did you?
Yeah, there was comments at some of the meetings, the community meetings, and I think we've had some discussion that while we are not looking for height limits in feet particularly, there was a sentiment that there should be some explanation as to, you know, how tall will it be, a 5-story building be, or a 7-story building, or a 10-story building. I think we'd like to see that added. Even as if it's just for, you know, for example, which would be about, you know, something like that. I think that there was thought that there should be some information available to the community.
Rob, this is Liz Haig. What we were going to do is put it in the staff report because it's not something we typically show in a comprehensive plan, but it will be discussed and the examples provided in the staff report.
Okay, I mean, as long as it's available to the public so that they know that a 10-story building is going to be between X and Y feet, I think that will prevent more problems in the future as people, you know, don't say, well, we never thought a 5-story building would be X feet. So I think that's positive.
I don't know how this thing is going, but I want to make a comment. We need to be careful that we don't encourage non-retail uses on the first floor. That the CBC is basically a business district, and I'm in favor of multi-use uses, including residential. But the first floor of all these buildings ought to emphasize the business aspect of the CBC.
Right, okay, so I think Liz has accepted the modification that Paul has proposed. Okay,
Yes.
next issue. Anything else on the center zone?
I have my hand up and I wanted to,
Jack, okay. You
sorry,
really
so
have your hand up.
we've run through a couple of things. Obviously, I was going to say Paul's original point, which was to 7 stories allows all the other control language where if it was buffering or contextually related to something else, it might be lower. It allows that to be controlling it. Number one. Number two, I would be in favor of adding something along the lines of a maximum height or number of stories to give a range. There's often interesting projects that come in that have lower floor to floors that actually end up being the same height as, let's say, a commercial office building, 10 stories, that is 120 feet at least. As a condominium project might only be, 100 feet. So, having some control for the neighbors so that they know that not all 10-story buildings are the same, and that there's sort of a max height total. And then the third piece, which was just the idea of, well, I'll just leave that. Those were the 2 comments.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I think this is an issue that I know we've talked with staff about as well. And like the point you've made and Rob has made, it's important for the community to know how tall a potential building will be, whether it's office or residential or mixed use or what have you. So good points.
Oh, sorry, the third point was about active streetscape. I think that's more the point, is for an active streetscape. I will tell you professionally, the idea of having streetscape retail is a really hard row to hoe right now. Retail is taking a huge beating, and for a number of years, that could be very difficult to provide a retail first floor that wouldn't just be boarded up. And so I think that if we can focus it on an active ground floor, which is what the language is right now, I think that would be more appropriate.
All right, thank you. So I see Rob and Rich with their hands up. Is it from leftover or is it a new issue? Rich?
Leftover, I'm done.
I just wanted to remind everybody that we talked that building height of stories is specifically covered in the building height section on page 9, which we reviewed last week, or last time. So I'm a little surprised that people are asking for more definition, because that seems pretty clear. I mean, do we need to remind everybody that the building height per story has already been defined?
Yeah, that's it. So we're moving on. Onto the general zone. So that's page 12. So just page 12. Maybe let's just do the rest of the zones and edge zone. Any comment on general zone and edge zone? 12 and 13, and then we'll move on to housing. All right, Bob, I see your hand up.
Thanks. I just wanted to point out one thing on the general zone. You can see it down there, sort of that line 384, 385 in that range. And I kind of want to point back to what I've heard a bunch just from the community, and also I think what was in one of the letters that the HOA wrote talking about the parking, sort of per the CBC planning workshops. One of the top priorities noted was the preservation of parking availability, Parking strategies should include ways to ensure that local residents continue to have access to economical and accessible parking when visiting downtown. As currently written, the language appears to encourage austere parking option and emphasizes shared and metered parking. And their recommendation is to require adequate free surface parking for local residents to shop, perform errands, and visit restaurants. And I just want to point out here that the way that this language is written, as it applies to the general zone, all three of our grocery stores in McLean are in the general zone. I believe the Giant, the Safeway, and the Balducci's, and our pharmacies are as well, along with a lot of other sort of what I'd consider neighborhood serving retail. And the way this talks about it is it would either be structured parking or surface parking, but located at the side or the rear of the building. And I just think realistically, from everything I've heard from the community, the idea of parking behind the Giant to go get their groceries or parking in a paid parking garage to get their pharmacy at the CVS or the Rite Aid doesn't really seem consistent with what I've heard from the community. So I just wanted to throw it out there and see if anybody else felt that way, or am I just am I just off base?
I think if I can just hold off and note your concern with that language, but wait until we get back into the parking section, because that's a bigger, broader discussion, I think. But I think you're spot on. It is a concern. And others have noted it as well in their comments. But if we can like make a note on that section to come back and make sure that the language is what we want. But there's a lot of discussion to have about parking sort of generally that we'll handle a little bit later in the papers.
Sure thing, makes total sense. To just thought I'd point out because it was definitely references it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. All right, anything else? On to page then 14, well, I guess into housing, 13. Let's look at the next couple of pages, 13, 14, 15, before we get into our next map. Any concerns, issues, points to raise? All right, I don't see any notes up, so we've got the, I did have, looking at the map on page 16, where it has the big star, Destination Public Park, right at Beverly and Elm, which I think most of us, certainly on the task force, don't think that's a probability. And I am reluctant to actually identify anywhere in that space where there might be a park, because who knows? It could be there, it could be in a whole lot of different places. So
I have an idea.
yes.
The open space called Bryn Mawr Park down there is not really in the CBC, but it is adjacent to it. And there is a pathway from Holmes Place that is unfinished and maintained actually by the McLean Square by Proffer, but it's only about 10 or 15 feet wide, and the trees have died and stuff like that. There's an opportunity there to connect that park to Old Dominion Drive. I think the staff ought to be taking a look at how to do that. I'm not going to propose how to do that, but there is that park is underutilized. It's in my neighborhood, completely surrounded by my neighborhood, and we wouldn't mind if it were used a little bit better, but it needs to be accessible. And there's an opportunity there to make it accessible to Old Dominion as well as up to Whittier, with some creative use of green space and walkways, etc.
All right, that's a good idea. Anyway, so my concern is actually, I would just prefer to not even have that giant star in there, because it suggests to the public that that's where it's going to be versus that's one of a number of places it could go. And I would just as soon leave that out and just do it as we have in other maps which is, you know, it's anywhere within the area that was hashtagged on earlier maps. So that's just an observation. It's not a point, but it's something I want to make sure that the public, when they look at a document, understands the document and doesn't have different expectations in what we can provide. So I see Rich and Rob both have their hand up. Comments?
I just think that I think that's a good suggestion, Kim. I do think there should be some sort of a footnote or reference or sentence that the park gathering space, whatever it turns out to be, will be within the general zone. I think there was a lot of talk about that at the public meetings, but I think your point's well taken.
I agree. It's we all agreed that we did not want to define the location of that space.
Kim, if you're talking, I believe you're muted.
Hey, Kim.
Going into 17 and 18.
Kim, can I say something? This is Andy Dorlester with the Park Authority.
Uh-huh.
Sure. It maybe it's too small to see, but there is a footnote in the legend of the map that there's a little asterisk, and it says that it does not represent an exact location, but it's somewhere within land unit C1. Maybe there's another way we could represent that so that's a little more clear that it just represents the destination park somewhere within C1.
You know, Andy, thank you for that. I did see that, and I think all of us saw that, but that's, it's not, I think for the public to go, the last thing they saw was Street Sense. Street Sense said this would be the perfect place to have a park. Perfect location and the scent, and it would be. You know, it's just we would have to then get a whole lot of different diverse property owners together to share. Anyway, it's just it's not likely to happen, therefore. So I don't, it's the expectations game. And so your point is right. You've got an asterisk in there, but it to me is not at all enough. And I'm afraid that people will look at it and say, well, that's where it should go. Or I just don't think, I think we should just say, here's where it could go anywhere in this region. You know, it's like I say, it's an expectations game on my concern.
One possibility is that you might want to consider putting some sort of light green tone within the C zone and tagging that as the zone where a destination public park is to be located.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a graphical representation.
Yeah, because I think what you want to do, you want to let people know here is the general region. I'm just opposed to putting down any suggestion on where that might be. So that's, and I think that's a good alternative, Rich. Okay, so any comments on pages 17 and 18 as we look at this, the park space? So Jen, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, before I move on, I just wanted to be clear on sort of the direction you want us to look at that for. So, so as a task force, you want the star removed and to look at like a green hatching over C1 to indicate that the park space should be located somewhere. So to somehow still denote that the park should go there, but not have the star.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any comments, questions, 17, 18? Okay, let's move on to then public facilities, bottom of 18. Going into schools.
Kim, I'm sorry, I had one question.
Sure.
The end of the signature park bullets, there's a bullet on, and I think we amended this a little bit already. There's elements for requiring the inclusion of elements for physical activity. It just seems like there's a lot of program at that park already, and I just wanted to throw that out there. It's not a huge issue either way, but maybe Andy Dorlister has a thought. Is that too much to program or expect out of that park space?
So I think there are ways to have elements kind of meet multiple objectives at one time. So you could have some kind of piece of art that's also interactive, climbable, or musical, or in some way engages people, so that it meets multiple objectives.
Okay.
Obviously, it will just depend on how how the park is designed and what the size of it is.
All right, Rich?
Thank you, Andy.
I also found the last bullet to be somewhat difficult in terms of understanding it, because it did earlier points talk about accessibility. It talks about connections for walking, biking. It talks about gatherings, including fitness classes, and it talks about unscheduled uses such as unstructured play. It seems like this is a redundant point. I mean, what I don't want is, I agree with Paul. What I'm afraid this language implies is that we have to put fitness equipment in the public park in order to meet this bullet. And I don't think any of us want that.
Right. Right, it's not for that kind of structured physical activity.
Yeah, like that exercise trail that they just built next to the Signet, right? I don't think any of us have any intention of that.
Right. Right, so maybe staff can take a look at that and make sure it's but it's broad. It's broad enough and not too specific on things like that.
I don't have any problem with what it says. It should maybe say as an example, as opposed such as.
Yep, could be. Okay, so we'll let staff look at that and come back with a perhaps softer version of that language. Yeah, because that you're absolutely right. We don't want to have that kind of specific activity and what I think most of us envision as the uses for this park.
Yeah, the language ought to be clear to say that these are examples, not requirements.
All right, turning to.
Sorry, Kim, this is Kelly. If I can just make one comment on this part of the conversation. I'm not sure we even need that bullet. In the opening paragraph, we talk about active and passive activities. I think that probably addresses what we're thinking about, as opposed to a place where, someone's going to work out with the equipment.
All right. Well, I'm just going to leave it to staff to look at that if they would. So you get a sense of, I think, that the intent of the task force is. All right, thanks,
Yeah,
Kelly.
we can definitely take a look at that.
All right, thank you. Okay, moving on to public facilities. So we have schools, libraries, police, fire, rescue. And I think too, that as we get into the issue of schools, now the one that's, this is a tough time to talk about anything with schools because besides the fact that, of course, no one's in school, but you understandably have concerns at the Franklin Sherman Elementary School, which is within the CBC. You have overcrowding issues at the high school. So at this moment in time, I think for the whole McLean area, anyway, public schools, there's a lot of sort of general unhappiness. And I think just the, I guess it's just to be aware of that as we look at this language, because if it's gonna result in overcrowding and people feel that their schools are going to be negatively impacted and not dealt with appropriately, obviously, if your child were in that school, you would be one very unhappy parent. So that said, our job is not to draw school lines and all of that. It's to make sure that that schools are properly positively looked after, and that there are enough resources and thought going into the impact on the schools so that appropriate authorities are planning appropriately as well. So with that, any comments on the section dealing with schools, libraries, police, and fire rescue? Rich?
I guess I'd like to ask staff to explain the significance of including language in the comp plan as it relates to school, because doesn't Fairfax County Public Schools have their own methodology and process for determining whether school facilities need to be expanded or not? And is having language in the comp plan a necessary part of initiating that conversation when it becomes an issue?
All right, who on staff is going to answer that one? Jen, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think you might have cut out, Rich, for part of your question. Was it related to the kind of menu of mitigations that are in the comp plan, like why those are all included?
I guess what I was asking was that it seems to me that Fairfax County Public Schools has their own process for determining whether a school is overcrowded or not, and whether or not additional facilities are needed. But am I mistaken in that? In fact, is the comp plan language a determining factor in what drives FCPS to initiate a study or not? Because I'm not clear about the significance of having this language.
Sure. So when a study looks at residential growth, the Fairfax County Public Schools certainly accounts for that when they're looking at projections in school capacity. Part of why this language is included is to put out there that there are various ways that school capacity is mitigated, or perhaps to let people know that there's not really a one-size-fits-all approach to how the students will be accommodated in the schools that serve the area. And so it's important to state that, yes, that is going to be a change, with this plan. It's built out to the residential growth that's projected. It's going to have an impact on schools, and that we should be sure that those types of mitigations are considered, and that they're included in the plan. So, and we've been trying to see if we could get a better sense of how, I know it's very complicated how FCPS at points in time do their capacity analysis, and kind of get an example of, for instance, with McLean High School, I know that was a process. So I can try to get more information to you all that might help explain a little bit better.
Okay, I think that would be helpful, John. Thank you. Rob, you had a comment?
I could wordsmith the hell out of this, but as it's written, it's pretty innocuous. As Rich has pointed out, other processes take over when people are moving into an area, new development is done, and the schools are always examined for capacity, et cetera. Now, I don't know what a developer in downtown McLean who puts up a 10-story building full of retirees is going to do to mitigate the effects. So I think basically just leave the damn thing alone. Let's move on.
Rob, you had a comment to make?
Yeah, I think that this is sort of necessary to reassure the community that it will be addressed. I mean, there's still a lot of frustration that maybe some of the problems crowding at McLean were caused by maybe a little lax standards in Tyson's. And I think that it's very important for the county and for the task force to show that we recognize that there is a serious problem at McLean High School now and a couple of the other schools as well, and that this will be addressed. I mean, this is a community document, and I think it needs to be there. I think that there needs to be pressure on both the county and the schools to address this, because we don't know who's going to live in these buildings. I mean, we may think that, I mean, I remember the famous thing, everybody thought that the reserve there would be no kids in the reserve because the houses are so expensive, you know, but we found out that there's been an awful lot of kids that have been in the reserve for years. So I support what's there.
All right, thank you. So I think at this point we'll leave the language alone, but to find out more about how the relationship between a comp plan and what the county public school actually does. So if you would, we can talk about that, or if you have something that the county puts together, John, you can send it out to the distribute it to the task force just as an FYI. That would be helpful. Okay, anything having to do with libraries, police, fire, rescue? Okay, Rich, your hand is up, but I'm thinking it might still be there from the last time, or? All right, moving on to page 21, wastewater management, utilities and implementation on, so 21, 22. And let's see, what else do we have? Let's just, actually, let's just finish up the rest. What else do we have on the next few pages? Anybody have any issues? Rich.
As I said in my comments about the second part of the document, I remain concerned about the overemphasis on accommodating bicyclists. And I suggest that position be more fully considered in light of the limitations it might present. So in line 730, I don't believe we should be including the word bicyclist, because I don't think we should be emphasizing accommodation for bicyclists in this plan.
How about simply adding the word primarily pedestrians and then?
Well, the thing is, what's the community you want to build, and not what do you think you'll have in the next 5 years? And as we've seen a lot of cyclists out in the past 4 months, I think that shows there are cyclists around in our community, and if they had a place to go and a safe place, a safe path to get there, you would see them on bicycles going into McLean. So you know, whether or not you say primarily, whether or not you make it not as prominent, but I again think we're building for 20 years. We're not thinking about the next 5, and I think we need to make sure we have the appropriate bike lanes to encourage that kind of activity in our CBC. Rob, you had your hand up as well. Is it on this issue or something else?
It's this issue. I just think we should, could we go to the undergrounding language?
Yes.
I think that on that section, we should make it clear that utility lines in front of a building, you know, a new construction site or building, however staff thinks it appropriate to phrase it, are expected to be placed underground and coordinated, etc. I think that there might be some confusion as to what is the obligation of a developer, and I think it's pretty much to do that what's in front of their building.
Okay, so did somebody hear that more clearly than I did, so they can? Yeah, because you're in and out of your conversation.
I think I understand what Rob is asking for, so I'll follow up with Jennifer on those comments.
All right. Thank you. Other comments? 21, 22.
Tim?
All right. I'm sorry, who is question?
That was me, Paul. We in relation to Rich's point on the second sentence of implementation, we're fine taking out that second sentence entirely. We feel like it's just repetitive and vision in a different place in the plan. So we just don't think it's necessary. So something for staff to consider.
All right. Other thoughts, comments?
Hi, this is Joanna. And question about in the line where it says the bicyclists. Is there any standard language that speaks to scooters and electronic kind of bicycles that the staff has seen in other comp plans? Because if we are thinking about 20 years out in the future, then bicycles will be one thing, but scooters and, you know, smaller electric bikes will be another. And I envision that being more popular than bikes.
Good point. I don't know. Bob, I see you're friendly. Cora, do you, or does other staff have other thoughts on the scooter language particularly? Yeah.
Yes, Bob Pecora here from Fairfax County DOT. I also have Chris Wells is on the line with us. He's our bike ped coordinator. So wanted to just touch base on that second sentence that is the under implementation. That the multimodal street network, we included it here because we're looking at all forms of transportation, whether it's bicyclists or pedestrians, but we can also include like the e-bikes and the scooters and such like that. But having this part here in the implementation section here, it's the one of the first parts that we're starting to talk about multimodalism. So when we get into the cross sections and transportation work, that we get into a little bit more detailed recommendations for multimodalism. But this is one of the key components that Fairfax County does employ in all the other comp plan amendments we do. It's something that we're encouraging that this does happen in all the CBC areas. So.
Okay, so to Johanna's point though, so the language, should it be broadened beyond pedestrians and bicyclists to be more general than bicycles or other forms of I mean, how does one?
Yeah. Let me, if it's okay, Kim, can I ask our Chris Wells to chime in on the bike and the e-bikes and the scooters?
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not one industry standard term. You could say, you know, wheeled vehicles, but that's not, you know, the average public is not going to think that you're talking about something on a sidewalk. So, you know, maybe just inserting the word scooters or something similar, but no, you know, it's micro mobility is the word that is being used, and no one's going to know what that means.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so maybe add the word scooters or, you know, or similar types. Yeah, something in there, because I think that is, and and that'll be a whole nother issue to worry about in terms of scooters, whether they're on a sidewalk or on a bike path or whatever, but that'll be another issue. Okay, other questions on pages 21, 22? Other concerns?
Yeah. Kim, I had my hand up, I thought, but I'm opposed to adding scooters. I think it's just a slippery slope between bicycles and motorcycles, and I think there are also concerns I have, and I see it in the district with people using bicycle lanes that don't observe common courtesy. And I think that you start mixing anything that's motorized with pedestrians, you're just asking for trouble. So, you know, I think that's a distinction that should be left to another day. And I don't think this document should include motorized vehicles with pedestrians.
But Bill, all this says in this sentence is that with the components for the vision to include a street network that's responsive to the needs of pedestrians. And the fact is, if they're going to appear, which in all likelihood they will, it's not a matter of, you can ignore it and then they'll just figure out their own rules. But because this
then put motorized vehicles with automobiles, but don't put them with pedestrians and bicycles.
All right, so we'll again leave to staff to fine tune that. So yeah, we don't want to do what happens in DC with the electric scooters running into pedestrians. I'm with you on that one. Other comments, questions? Winnie?
I'm on the community involvement one on page 22. Are we there yet, Kim?
We are there. Okay.
I wanted to raise the issue. I mean, the staff says that it'd like to talk to the task force about taking the McLean Planning Committee out. I'm most interested in what they have to say.
All right, Jen, do you want to start on this or?
Yeah, sure. So we had a meeting, a small meeting with Winnie, Rich, Maya, and Anne on the 24th of June, where we discussed this language. And there are a couple of things that came out of that discussion. One is that there should be language that maintains MPC's role in development review. But there was also this sense that the current wording that talks about implementing the plan under policy guidance may not be the most accurate way to describe their role, and it can maybe talk about how MPC advises the supervisor and implements design standards. So we're going to look into that language. There was also discussion about how that this section could also clarify that developers will also need to go to other groups for comment and review. So that was something either to broaden this section to let people know that in fact is something that needs to happen. So those were, I think those, I'm just looking at my notes. I think those were the couple of things that were covered in that discussion. So clarifying the role of MPC and also being clear about other organizations besides MPC that also have a reviewing role or a commenting role in development applications. Is that, I mean, definitely feel free to jump in if there.
Yeah, I'll jump in at this point. So I think at this point, it's obviously community involvement is a key component to approval of any project. And so the language that is there currently does not reflect the current process. It reflects part of a process, but not the full process. So that's true. The question is, do you go and you go through and make sure every detail of our current process is in there? But this is a comp plan. This is not a process for approval of any future development. So the question is, how do you write it? That's, do you list every organization that plays a role? Do you talk about, obviously, the value of these organizations, but you don't want to put it in a comp plan because the process has certainly changed since this language was originally drafted. And but you don't want to codify something that's today because it might be changed, 5 years down the road. So no one is trying to take away anything from any organization, but it is trying to figure out how to have a process, or maybe outline the organizations that are included in the community involvement section without actually talking about a process. So that was the intent, as I understand it. Wendy, did you have questions to that or thoughts in response to that?
Well, the McLean Planning Committee, just like the McLean Revitalization Corporation, are made up of community groups. That does not in any way, shape, or form say that individual community groups shouldn't have their say. For example, my HOA will have something to say about this plan, is my guess. And we already have several comments from different HOAs that surround it, and I think they should have every way of doing that. The McLean Planning Committee has often got very far into the nitty-gritty of some of the issues and dealt with county as well as with the with the developer or whomever we're dealing with at the moment on that subject. And that is not to take away from anybody else. It's just a committee that our sole purpose is to look at developments within the CBC. So I am not particularly, my concern is I don't understand, and still don't, after the meeting and with the discussion with the staff, I'm still not sure why that's being taken out.
Yeah, I think the only intention is that it's here as sort of the process.
Yeah,
okay, it's listed, and it isn't the current process for approval. It is certainly a very important and first step for a process.
So nothing here says that it's approval, hon. It says, that we're involved, and that's I don't want to say that the McLean Planning Committee is making the decisions in any way, shape, or form. Our context is to give advice to the supervisor. And I'm perfectly willing for that kind of language to be in there if that would make everybody happier or make me happier. I don't know. Rich, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I guess maybe I'm confused about something. Is the language that is on the screen currently that's underlined, that's proposed language that's going to stay in, correct?
This is Jen. So I think we do owe you a markup of something. So because this was published, I think it's maybe a timing confusion with the timing. After we talked, we are going to work on different language for this. We just haven't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would add, I guess the thing that I would say then is one of the things we've heard from the development community is the Byzantine nature of public input and how it may burden know what site is going to hit them with something, and they don't know the landscape of how public input works or how it can derail their project. And that one thing that this language that's here now does is it does provide a certain level of clarity about what a developer could expect. So if you're going to rewrite the section, I hope you'll keep that in mind, because the notion, my sense is that keeping the notion that it's very broad and amorphous is not a good thing. And I don't know if any of the other developers on the task force would like to speak to that.
Okay. I do want to, this is nothing, I know, and it's tough to see it this way. It's nothing personal to MPC. You know, and I understand your concern. It is a matter of whether or not you codify anything in language, and do you simply not mention generally the value of community involvement with organizations such as all these organizations. And to your point, Winnie, you could say, you know, for example, MPC was created with I mean, you could go through that and mention that. It's just, it doesn't provide a path for any developer looking at this language, and nor should it, because again, the language, the process could change in 5 years or so. So it's something that needs to be a general statement about the value of community involvement and the role that the community organizations will play in advising the supervisor, because this should not be seen as codifying anything, or because it's just simply not, we don't want to codify anything in comp language. This is, again, comp language, and it's something that's supposed to be guidance, and it should be at least up to date before it's adopted. So, so I'll leave it to staff to look at that, share with MPC, and then we can talk about that again, because you know, this issue obviously we want to resolve before we move towards the end, because I know it's a concern for a number of folks.
Well, if you're going to take that position, then Kim, why don't you just put in a couple of innocuous sentences under community involvement, and then it'll just be a free-for-all, and everybody can kind of work it out on their own, because either you're specific or you're not. And if you're not going to be specific, then you may as well just be very broad and general, and then just see and let the chips fall.
Well, but it's a process as outlined by whom? Who decides what the process is? It's probably the supervisor. So I'm just saying it's not authority given by a comp plan. A comp plan doesn't decide who has the authority. So let's take that out. This is not that issue. We as a comp plan writer don't give anybody authority to do anything. So all it is the process is determined by the supervisor in terms of how he wants to be advised, and the process he's put together, she's put together in the future. So, so let's work on that language. But I think, again, we're looking at comp language that's going to be here for 10, 20 years, and not to reflect the process as we're looking at it today. So that's my only point, you know, and I certainly appreciate the value MPC brings to the table, and they are the group that focuses in all the itty-bitty details, which we all appreciate. So, so we'll look at language, and we'll have Jen and staff work on that and get back to us. Any other things on 22, 23, public facilities, interim development conditions? I think this is one, in Rich, where you had some concerns on interim development conditions.
Kim?
Yes.
This is Jen. I wanted to note that we were intending to transition to other items on the agenda. We've got some staff on the line for the environment and heritage resources in Old Dominion cross section. I know, you know, you guys are kind of on a roll, but those items have been pushed at other meetings. So I just wanted to ask if we wanted to try to get to those and kind of come back to interim development conditions. I think that this will probably be a good discussion. But, you know, we do have other folks that are on the line for those other items, so.
Sure, we can do that, Jen. So let's go to the environment section. So this is in section 2, the language.
Yeah, and let me ask you all, we had Old Dominion on our agenda for a couple of times, and I was maybe we should do you guys want to hear that presentation? It's got great pictures. You all want to, we could start with Old Dominion, since that was here to tabled a few times.
Which do you want to do, Jen? You want to do environment and get them off, or stormwater?
Let's do, I think let's do Old Dominion.
Okay.
That's all right, yeah.
And so what pages, where does that start on our section?
It's new. I'm trying to share content. Let's see. All right. Come on, baby.
Hey.
All right. Can people see it?
Hey, Liz.
Yeah.
So David actually still has this screen sharing capability, and he's got the presentation that he can pull up. So if that's okay with you.
Right. I think I got it up. Do you see it or no?
We do not.
No, because I think only one person can share it, and I think that's still David.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
It's the same slides. Is that okay?
Never mind.
Do you see it now?
All right. I've got a big white square. Now my computer's hung up.
Do you see on the screen that it says Old Dominion Drive?
Yes, we do.
I do not. I've got this big white square in the way. Why is this? I think because I was trying to share, so something's mucked up. What do I do?
I see the aerial map of McLean
too. That's the opener slide. Well, I guess I can do it without seeing it.
We can. Sorry, all these technical
I cannot
challenges.
scroll the pages. So, all right. So, let me just kick it off, and maybe it'll clear up. If not, David, I'll just say next. So this is the aerial of the McLean CBC, and the shaded street there is Old Dominion Drive. And I know we spent umpteen meetings on the cross section, so we do not revisit this lightly. But we do think we have some good reasons for revisiting this particular cross section, and we felt an obligation to share it. So to the next slide, David. Did you do it?
Yes, I did.
Oh boy, I'm not even seeing that. Okay. So basically, why did we decide to come up with an alternative? A number of things. First of all, we got a lot of feedback from the community, both at the meetings, but also, I would say, comments on the draft plan after we sent those out. And staff also happened to attend a workshop put on by a national association that showed us some new guidance on bike lane design. And so we really felt that we could come up with an alternative that better addressed some of the concerns we heard, such as trying to keep the right-of-way dimensions as small as possible. And right now we have an uneven amount of right-of-way taken from each side. One is a little bit more than the other. So this new cross-section that we're going to share is fair to both sides of Old Dominion. We also heard loud and clear that there was an interest by the community to keep pedestrians and cyclists conflicts minimized. So some of the things we looked at in evaluating an alternative was, how do we keep that Main Street experience, while also, and creating that sense of place in McLean. Even though we have to accommodate some larger regional network traffic. We certainly want to make sure it's equitable and safe to all properties, again, minimize the right of way, and have a consistent, predictable design. So, and some of the other things there. So with that, let me first recap for you because it's been a while. Next slide. The last Old Dominion Drive cross section as we had it. So that was endorsed by the task force. So what you'll see here is that on the north streetscape, we had the two-way cycle track with a 6-foot sidewalk. And on the south streetscape, we had an 8-foot shared walkway. So, and that kind of mixed the cyclists and pedestrians on that side, although we figured the regional traffic would adhere to the two-way cycle track. But again, in this seminar, we learned that particularly at intersections, that can, drivers aren't used to looking kind of for bicyclists coming both ways, and that really they felt like eliminating that sort of two-way traffic was important. So in developing our options, next slide, staff looked at some best practices, case studies, and some research. And so we wanted to share 2 examples with you. One is in Berlin, Germany, and this was a street that was adapted with the addition of a bike facility along an existing sidewalk. And what's very interesting about this is that if you notice, there's different pavement, sort of like a transition zone between the sidewalk and the more designated bike facility, but it's not grade separated, it's the same level. So this provides flexibility should there be different conditions, more pedestrians or more bicyclists on that type of facility. At the same time, you can have more place-friendly, context-sensitive materials rather than what's typically done in a cycle track. So this was one example we really liked. Next slide. The other one that we sort of accomplishes many of the same ideas is the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. And what you can see there, again, they've got a sidewalk next to a facility it's predominantly for cyclists, but again, it allows for flexibility depending on the various volumes of users that are present. And again, it uses a different material. This is, these are different materials than say we would use for McLean, but a different material in the transition zone. So it makes that clear. And then there's pavement markers to also orient people with signage and pavement. So next slide. So what we're going to propose for Old Dominion rather than the previous cross section for your consideration, and we really think it's preferable to the current one, is what we're calling a pedestrian and cyclist pathway. And in this illustration, you'll see that, not including the landscape panel, the streetscape is a total of 12 feet. You've got a 5-foot bike zone and a 5-foot pedestrian zone, again, with the idea of a transition material that is at the same grade. And again, this provides for flexibility based on the volume of users. So we think, and this happens to show in this illustration, the current McLean streetscape materials with the concrete banding and then the pavers in between. So that's something that we could consider. That those kind of details typically aren't in the plan, but would be in the design guidelines that we'll work on following the plan adoption. So we wanted to get this out to you so you had time to think about it and come back maybe, the next meeting with all your questions, but we at least wanted to get it out and share it with you. And Again, we really think that this has advantages. Next slide. You'll see it's a consistent cross-section and intersection design. We've got the same right-of-way expectations on both sides of the road. Again, it allows for adaptability for varying volume of users. We think it balances the throughput of cyclists with a main street feel better than the other cross-section. And everybody wants to make a good, strong sense of place for McLean and customize the experience. Next slide. So the alternative design, this is now showing the cross section. So you can see a 5-foot pedestrian strip, a 2-foot transition, and a 5-foot bicycle pathway on both sides for a total of 12 feet on each side. Now, as it turns out, it is actually 1 foot wider overall. It's 97 feet versus 96 feet, but really that's 6 inches on each side. But this way, one side of Old Dominion is not disproportionately burdened with the right-of-way, and we've got a safer, more Main Street concept. Finally, the last slide, which allows you to see the two concepts side by side. First, at the top is what the task force approved or endorsed, and then the below one is the alternative that we just discussed. So that is it. And I also have Joanne Phoebe with me, who helped develop the concept, and we're both available for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. Yeah, I think that looks like a good plan, and it does take care of the concern that I know many of us had in the task force, which is the unevenness of we would ask. So with that, anybody with questions or comments? Winnie, I see your hand is up. Maybe it's still up though. I don't know. Jack, I think that's a new hand.
Yes, I was actually just applauding this. I think this is right up the right alley. I think it addresses the idea for people who are throughputing on a bike.
Yeah.
And taking some consideration that if they're on that, then they need to, they have some clarity. There are some downtown bike lanes where they are grade separator, have a curb, specifically down by the wharf. And I see people go ass over tea kettle on that every single time I go down there, both pedestrians and bicyclists. So a smooth transition and some clarity between, two-tone paving or paving techniques is very effective. Both as a bicyclist, I'm saying that, as a pedestrian working with bicyclists. So I heartily endorse this.
Thank you.
Other
Kim, I don't know about my hand up thing here.
Go ahead, Bill.
So interesting, because as first of all, I'm not sure I agree with giving equal footage to bicycles and pedestrians, because I think that we should take maybe we should take a fresh look at this whole thing. I had a conversation actually this afternoon with our group at the Federal City Council about looking within the district at a fresh look at how we look at underutilized and misallocated street space. There's a lot going on these days with sidewalk dining, with parklets, with a lot of other really creative stuff. I think in the districts, they had a large group that was put together with a return to office, that focused on multiple areas, including transportation. And I think if we are going to look at this, we probably ought to broaden some of the examples that we're looking at. And again, I'm open to taking a fresh look at this, but I think we ought to take a fresher look than simply just going with 5 feet and 5 feet on both sides of the right of way.
All right, other comments? Bob Montgomery.
Sorry, I couldn't find the applause icon, so I just had to go with the hand icon. But I actually have to echo Jack's sentiments that I think the county did a good job with a sort of a very clean design that I appreciate sort of their effort to not expand the right of way, but to still sort of accomplish this pedestrian and bike. I like it all being at grade here. And I guess my only other thing that I would add to that is I noticed when I was reading through it that it was, I think, very similar or almost the same right-of-way dimensions as the plans for Chain Bridge Road. And I think they were both 97 feet and very similar in terms of what the amount of space taken up would be. And in some ways, if there is general support for this, that there may be something to just from a simplicity and a cleanliness of language to just say, hey, look, take this plan, apply it to Old Dominion, apply it to Chain Bridge. It's taken the same amount of space as the plan on Chain Bridge would have anyway, and just say, hey, look, this is what is on these streets. Just like we've got something for Beverly Elm, and we get away a little bit from sort of a different plan on every street, sort of depending on where you are on each block. So
I would wholeheartedly endorse that plan. I think the simplicity and having a consistent look would very much distinguish the CBC and identify it as our downtown. So I agree with that statement. Other thoughts and comments? Rich?
Can you remind me again how much wider this overall cross section is compared to what's there now?
Oh boy. Somebody, oh gosh, I don't have that with me. Any of the transportation folks have that handy?
What I'm trying to understand is how much private property is necessary on either side of the street to make this work.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, there's enough right of way, Rich, but it might be 5 or 6 feet in some places.
The good thing is Old Dominion has the most right of way of any areas and was seen as kind of the main regional connector through the CBC, but we didn't want it to just feel like, it was a regional trail. We wanted to balance that with the Main Street feel. So that's what we were attempting to do. And so it's comparable, as you can see, to the previous one that was endorsed by the task force.
Is there any safety issue with the two pathways being on the same level in terms of bicycles being a hazard to pedestrians if they're traveling too fast?
I mean, it will be signed. I mean, there's always a possibility of stuff, but again, the idea is that the different materials will clue people in to what's going on. I mean, if you go on W&OD Trail today, it's basically a shared path, and by and large, people manage to navigate all different types of users. So I think with time and practice and appropriate signage, that those concerns can be by and large ameliorated.
The illustration that you showed seemed to imply that the bike path and the pedestrian path would have the same concept of brick paving, which is a little different than what the German cross section showed.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how we rendered it. We could look at alternate materials, certainly. If that helped to clue people in a little bit more cognitively, we could certainly look at something that's a different color or material or something. So yeah, this is just an illustrative using the existing streetscape standards.
I'm a little concerned about overall safety here. Two things. One of them is that Old Dominion, as we've said, is heavily trafficked. What does this do to the throughput and the speeds necessary to get the people through McLean, or the speeds that they'll be going? Is there a safety issue with that? Number one. Number two, the putting bicycles going both directions on both sides, is that on both sides of the street or on one side of the street? I can't tell.
No, it's out. So in the earlier, in the illustrative, it shows a sign. So you would really be going one way on each side. And that's actually safer so that motorists know which way to look for, at least for the bicyclists. The pedestrians obviously can go both ways, but they're slower moving targets.
Yeah, okay, I can buy into that. I just couldn't tell from
Sure.
the graphic here. And the other thing is that what does this do to the possibility of having sidewalk or enliven the street, sidewalk cafes, etc.? Does this make enough space for that?
Yeah, there's still a building zone, which can vary depending on, you know, if you have a sidewalk or a cafe, you would have a bigger building zone. So we think, again, this will be more appealing and more attractive for ground floor activity because it's not so stark as having the cycle track.
All right, other comments, questions?
Kim, this is
We can come back to this, you know, I know we're just throwing this out at you now, but we can come back at the next meeting if people think of new questions or whatever.
All right, thanks, Liz. Who was just talking? Sorry.
That was Bob Pecora, Kim. I just want to mention a couple of things, and Chris Wells is alongside here, so we can speak to you about bike and pedestrian safety as well. But something that Jim mentioned about traffic or volume throughput, these facilities are back of the curb, so they're not going to have any effect on the traffic itself. The only thing that we looked at, well, one of the things we looked at when we did the transportation analysis was looking at when the pedestrians and bicyclists get to the intersections and there's the PED signal, so the pedestrians activate the signal. It has just a minimal effect on the timing of the throughput of the signals, but it doesn't detract from the volume of vehicles going through the intersections or the timing of it that much. It's not a significant difference. But the signals are activated by the pedestrians and the cyclists. So if there's no one there, it's the signals are operating because of the vehicles themselves. But if there's like a lot of people wanting to cross the road, then the signals are activated by pedestrians, and it works into the timing of all the signals. So it's not just one particular signals, but it applies to the entire CDC network. It's complicated, but it can be worked out, and it's actually not that much of an impact for vehicle throughput. And then Chris can mention just a couple of things about safety and why, and how it's how having both facilities together can work out.
Right.
Sure. Let me just briefly go over a couple of things that were mentioned. I mean, again, this is a compromise. This is a compromise between providing the 5-foot minimum facility for a bicyclist and a pedestrian, and yet balancing the needs of the community as expressed by the task force of balancing the right of way and looking at a acceptable, best practices. If we had more room, we would have bigger facilities and potentially barrier curb separated facilities. And yes, those can be tripping hazards. So that's the reason we have the flush facilities allows for that overflow movement of in McLean, we would anticipate, obviously there would be more pedestrians than bicyclists, but we need to allow for the movement of both. The comment about the material being the same, that's a good point. As Liz pointed out, we chose the McLean standard for illustrative purposes. We would have signs that would say, depending on what side of the road you're on, bike this side, pedestrians this side. The common practice is that the bikes are nearest the road. But the intent of this is to inform the bicyclists that they must yield, that this is not a high-speed dedicated bicycle facility, that they've entered a shared environment where the common etiquette is, and again, the signage could reinforce this, that bicyclists would yield to pedestrians. So it's not perfect in all aspects per se, but to be more perfect, we would have to have more space, which there does not seem to be an appetite for. And the other aspect, as Bob mentioned, was the intersections. Again, in a perfect bicycle facility world, you would have separate crosswalks for bicycles. So you'd have the additional space required for a pedestrian crosswalk and a bicycle crosswalk. We don't have that here in McLean. We're not even proposing that down on the Route 1 corridor. On the Route 1 corridor, we're proposing to have a cycle track next to a walkway, but then at the intersections, bring them into a shared plaza, similar to what we're talking about here, again, to manage the expectations of both cyclists and pedestrians that they need to share with each other, that neither one has the implicit dominant right-of-way over the other.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Okay, we'll move on to topics, but think about if you have any other questions, comments about this new plan. We can raise it in our next meeting next month. With that, then, Jen, do we want to go on to the environmental issues?
Yeah, before we go on, the trees down the middle, will those block people's left-hand turn? Will block their vision from a safety point of view?
To Bob.
Yes, thanks. So the trees that are in the middle in the landscape median, right now there's only like a couple of small median islands that have that. So they do have to meet what they call clear distance or zone requirement, clear distance requirements by VDOT. So looking around the corner at the intersections, you are able to see that. But currently there's only like 2 islands on Old Dominion, and they're small. There's one between Chainbridge Road and I believe it's Beverly Road. So that right now it probably shouldn't have an impact at all. But if there's more, let's say we add more median islands, and that's one of the pilot program ideas that we were exploring, is to change the two-way left turn lane to a landscape median. We have to meet VDOT standard requirements for what kinds of landscaping goes in those medians, but also we need to provide sight distance, and so that vehicles looking around the corners, looking at the different at the intersections for the turning movements, that they are not blocked by any kind of vegetation. So that's a later phase and all that. But right now, the medians that are there, I don't believe pose a concern to the intersections.
My last comment would be, who maintains this? We have a problem with that up in front of the Giant up there, and on up toward the athletic facility. Who maintains this greenery?
The greenery that's inside the VDOT right of way, I believe, is by VDOT. But
actually, Bob, this is in a revitalization district, so a lot of that is maintained by our maintenance program that we have for streetscape and our revitalization districts. If a developer builds, say, a block of this cross section, we usually get them to proffer to maintain their piece of it.
That's been a concern on the McLean Planning Committee when I was on there. We got all these beautiful ideas, but we don't know how to maintain it. So I think we need to think about that before we approve this. I'm not opposed to what we're doing here. I'm just bringing up that past experience has been that this has been an issue.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
You are right, Bob, but we've gotten more funding and dedicated staff to the maintenance, and I think you've maybe seen we've eliminated trip hazards. We're about to pour some new sidewalk. We replaced benches. So we have been able to get increased funding in the last few years, and we have a little backlog, but we're getting caught up.
And we're talking about a 20-year plan, as Kim pointed out there. 20 years from now, COVID is gone, and we're back to business and collecting taxes. But right now, we probably couldn't afford to pay for it.
All right, with that, let's go on to the environment and stormwater management issue. Because I think we have staff on hand for that, to the extent we have issues and concerns.
Yes.
Okay, Jen, go ahead.
So, yeah, I was gonna note that I think the main concern that maybe to start on is the 1-inch retention, stormwater language. I can't. So we have Joe Gorney on the line, who's a senior environmental planner with us, and then I can't tell if Katie Torgerson is on as well. She's been also very involved in reviewing the stormwater guidance that's in this current draft. So I'm going to have maybe Joe sort of explain the research or the considerations that have gone into a new look at this language.
Sure, thanks, Jen. Yeah, again, I'm Joe Gorney. I'm with the Environment and Development Review Branch. And then Katie Torgerson is also with us tonight, and she's from the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services. She works in the Stormwater Planning Division. So in looking at this, we got an internal staff team together to try to assess what's happening in this area. And I'll get back to, I guess, one of my questions for all the folks assembled here tonight. But to a very large degree, we see the redevelopment of the CBC as a great opportunity, actually. This area, we tried to describe essentially the situation as we understand it, which is that this was developed a number of years ago with a lot of impervious cover and not necessarily with a lot of controls. And so that's part of the background. The other background, as you saw with the text, is that we've got essentially a drainage divide. We have Dead Run that goes to the north, and by and large, the county has done some projects north of there that seem to be pretty good at managing the flows that are coming into them. However, to the south with Pimmet Run and Saucy Branch and by Bryan Park and Dillon Avenue, that's not necessarily the case. And so we're looking at it kind of two different scenarios, I guess, going on here. So that's just kind of the background where we started from just what we've understood. There are a couple of issues going on with the area that might include the storms that come in that are a single event that are fairly extreme. And then other things could be the character of more of a nuisance, perhaps when you have lesser storms and such. So just, and again, staff at this point, we're trying to collect some data so we can find out what have the storms been doing in this area recently. And so essentially, having said all that, the question is, what kind of development is anticipated for this area? What can individual property owners do? And the more we talked as staff, the more we thought each and every property owner has a role to play. And actually, we're very excited about that, because if you go from a situation where you have no controls to meeting today's standards, that's a great improvement. And we are very much happy about that. On the other hand, there might be some more regional issues that go outside of the limits of the CBC. So these are kind of some of the issues we've been discussing internally. The 1-inch retention was to help make sure that we didn't have any more flowing to these channels, perhaps than we had to. However, the more we talked, the more we thought, well, there might be some circumstances where you just can't get that infiltration. You have smaller sites. And it would be great to have consolidated projects, and absolutely we would like to see those. Even where partnerships with the county would be great. for areas within the CBC and outside of it. And so I guess suffice it to say, we're still looking at it. And at this point, we wanted to, we're looking at different standards. We think that everyone has a role to play. We would like individual sites to do what they can, recognizing that not everybody's in the same situation. If there's one thing you learn about stormwater, it's that every site is unique. And there are circumstances, whether it's starting out as forested or it's starting out as a parking lot, there are different issues to contend with: the soils, the infiltration, the space available, et cetera. So that's quite a bit. I thought I'd just throw it out there and let you know what we're talking about. And again, Katie Torgerson of our Stormwater Planning Division has been coordinating a lot with the staff to try to get us together and find out a little bit specifics and in terms of specifically the data, which is what we're trying to get together at this point. So that's kind of where we are right now, and we wanted to see what the concerns were of the McLean group so that we could maybe look at that a little more closely and try to figure out what sort of alternatives you're looking at. And I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, well, great. Thank you, Joe, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions before I open it up to the floor. So one is, what is the current standard? And then two, as you mentioned about these smaller properties, and as I understand it, McLean CBC Revitalization District is like a lot of other revitalization districts with very small property lines and lots. So, so it's like what's reasonable to expect, and yet you want obviously something that's going to be sustainable and good for the community and good for the environment. So it's that trade-off. But if you could look at both of those issues for me, and then we'll go on to answer some of the other questions as well.
Okay, and I'm not sure if Katie's here or not. She's been having a lot of conversations with our land development services folks. But if Katie's on the line, I think she might be able to answer that a little more directly. If not, I can give it a go. I don't see her.
I don't see her name on here, yeah.
Yeah, in general, optimally, what we would like to see is that 1 inch, as we put in there, of the retention. So the idea would be to, from a quality perspective, to retain the 1 inch and to try to make sure that that is not going into some streams where the volumes just cannot be handled. So trying to keep it there. And short of that, I know LDS staff works, if that cannot happen, the background or the next step would be to retain as much as possible and prevent it from being released, and then moving on to other standards. So from there, you may talk about a good forested condition or making assumptions about what the cover might be, such as turf, grass, or there's kind of a litany of different things that might go into it. Right now, we emphasize the on-site through infiltration. So basically the green stormwater infrastructure as is cited there, and the 1 inch. However, if we need to look into, I guess, being specific about perhaps some other alternatives and being more explicit of kind of the decision train, I think we're talking about doing that now internally. So we don't have that language for you tonight. But we were looking for feedback from you folks on that and some of the issues that I guess you have seen. Because one of the biggest thing is we as staff wanted to see what is the problem in this area. I've kind of thrown out there what we see as the problem, but we want to make sure any solution that has come up with knows what the problem is. So we know what we're trying to solve. So we'd like to know what the priorities are for the McLean group as well.
All right, then. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to call on Rob. So you have a hand up.
Yes, our Environment, Parks and Recreation Committee has indicated to me that the Fairfax County standard of 1 inch is lagging a lot of what we see in other parts of the country, including Montgomery County, Maryland, to answer that question.
Okay, so basically, I guess what I said there was that the 1 inch is not enough to handle the volumes that are.
Well, what I've been told is that the standard has gone from 1 inch to something higher in a lot of the areas, our competing areas around the country, including Montgomery County, Maryland. So I'm just trying to, is that true?
So that's
Okay, yes. Actually, there are a lot of areas that are looking at that. People are looking at the standards now and saying, is that enough to handle the storm events that we are experiencing? And that was part of that data. We do have data, of course, for a lot of different areas. One thing that we would really like to look at is the data's about flows, about stormwater flows in this area. And we're starting to look at that. We don't have it yet. And that would help to understand then what any standard should be. And then at that point, we also get into discussions of small lots versus larger lots, and whether that 1 inch is a realistic expectation for some people, and whether you are put into a situation where you need some multi-lot, longer frontage, perhaps for some bioretention facilities. And if you have that, what does that do to your streetscapes? And where can it be, and private maintenance, et cetera. So I think that's something that once we get a little more data, we should be able to answer a little more definitively. Unfortunately, I don't have a precise answer for that right now, other than yes, 1 inch is good and 1.5 inches or 1 3/4 is better. Absolutely. However, another point that I would mention though is a lot depends on the receiving channels. So when we have the facilities, we're talking about pipes in the ground, and that has its own storage capacity. There's pinch points that are part of the discussion, but then there's also the channel and how well the channel is situated currently. Can it handle the flows? And what about the receiving stream? So that's when they talk about outfall analysis. You're following it till you get somewhere. And perhaps in some situations, our major concern is not necessarily retaining it on site, but slowing it down as much as can. So instead of the water quality, some of that retention, maybe we could focus more on the volume solutions. So we do allow it to be released, perhaps a little bit more than the 1 inch standard, but yet you're detaining more of it on site from a volume perspective, which then leads to less flow, which then helps with water quality. Because we also recognize that some of the quality concerns are when you get scouring in your receiving channels, and the actual sediment itself becomes sandpaper that just continues to exacerbate the issues as the water flows downstream. So I guess at the end of the day, the answer might be it depends. And absolutely, it would be better to have more than the 1 inch. On the other hand, we're trying to recognize that sometimes even through the site review process, not everybody's going to be able to do that. Our land development services, site review staff will look at that. They'll come up with the solutions for the people. And I guess what we're thinking about doing is trying to put in a little bit more of that discussion into this here to say, what is the problem? And let's make sure the solution matches the problem that's been identified.
All right, Rich.
I'd like to ask a couple of questions. The first one is, I don't think I heard an answer to the previous question about whether the language and the requirements contained in this text exceed what is currently in the Fairfax County Stormwater Management Ordinance. Is it exceeding or equal to?
Right. That's a good question. And again, some of that stuff is situation specific with the site review. So there may be a combination of things that is considered in site review. So I'm going to have to get back to you on that, because I don't want to, at this point, I'm not sure about committing to one way or the other on what kind of discussions the LDS staff would make. And so I'm going to have to do a little bit more look into Chapter 124 of the county code to find an answer for you.
Because I thought basically that Fairfax County has ordinances that govern the design of stormwater management on all developments within the county, don't we?
Yes.
And civil engineers follow these standards when they're hired by a developer or anybody to do a project, right? And if it's not in the CBC, they just follow the standards that the county already has put forth, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So why would we employ anything beyond what is required by the county as a whole? As I understand it, the whole purpose of a CBC is to encourage development. But all I see here are higher standards and higher costs. I guess I don't understand why any of this language is in here and why there isn't a single sentence that says new development shall comply with the most current standards of the Fairfax County Stormwater Management Ordinance, period.
Yeah, I guess the short answer would be, again, as I alluded to earlier, different areas have different challenges. So yes, meeting a particular standard for this CBC could result in a site review where it's not feasible or reasonable to meet a particular standard in a certain way. So we're doing off-site mitigation. So maybe there's some credits of some sorts that are granted. And then you're still left with the same issues that might be making themselves more than known in a particular area. So really, again, it gets back to defining the problem for a particular area and then saying, is the solution that we've got in this policy document leading us in the right direction? Yes, we recognize that, okay, maybe you can do some credits for whatever it might be, but what is that doing to the site? Is the decision tree that's followed for whether it's reasonable to do a particular ordinance requirement to fulfill that, is that going to be enough? Should you go in a certain direction? We're trying to make the reviewers understand, both for the policy perspective, but also for the LDS staffers. We're trying to lead the projects a certain way that's going to solve the problem at hand. And sometimes, yes, you can get waivers and you can meet that ordinance and it might not do anything for the issue that is you find yourself in here. So if you've got these extreme storm events and you meet your requirements by doing off-site particular credits, depending on whatever it is, that may not put you in a good place. And so this is trying to make sure that, again, the solution matches the problem.
Right, but now this becomes a completely, essentially unpredictable, random exploration, and a developer has to pay a civil engineer and other design professionals an enormous amount of money to come up with ideas that may or may not be acceptable either on the low end or the high end. And doesn't it create a huge amount of uncertainty and force a developer to put a lot of extra money in up front before they even know if they have a technically feasible project? It seems, I don't know why we would do this. We're trying to promote development.
Well, again, the development that's going to happen, we think could be very positive for the stormwater in this area, but it also, again, points people in a particular direction. And when they have options, maybe there's an option that's better for McLean that might otherwise have not been entertained. And so that's essentially what this is supposed to do. And again, it creates the decision tree to say, we try this. Optimally, everybody would do that. Maybe that's not possible for the property owners, such that we're going to try to give them some flexibility to help where they can for this area. And without that guidance, there is a concern that perhaps we're not going to be taking care of the issues that rear their ugly heads potentially in this area when we have some extreme events every 8 years or so.
Kim, I would ask that we call a vote of the task force members tonight to see what the majority of task force members think about the policy outcome that we should be driving this issue.
Well, Rich, I think as an alternative to that idea is to let the staff sort of come up with language that more closely outlines, Joe, what you just said, that our standard is X. Maybe it's the 1 inch, you know, so that's our standard, or whatever the current standard is for Fairfax County. And I think it has to be understood what the circumstances are before you go into a decision tree, because I think also Rich is spot on. If we're trying to figure out how to reduce all the possible expenses to going into a development, and now we've added on to the expenses, we don't think that's going to work to our advantage either. So if you could perhaps play with that language a bit and you know, come back and share that with us, because you know,
Kim, he just said that he wanted to craft language that met the expectations of the community. So why don't we give him our expectations?
Well, would you like to articulate that expectation then, Rich?
Well, I just did. I said exactly a moment ago what I think the language should be.
Okay, do one time for all of us then.
That the language in this section should simply say that stormwater management mitigation should comply with the most current ordinance in Fairfax County. Nothing more, nothing less.
Okay, and then Joe, would that give the county that flexibility that you've talked about is perhaps needed sometimes to look for alternatives to whatever that standard is?
That yes, absolutely, the flexibility would be critical, but again, I don't know if that's enough direction. Staff, I mean, obviously the McLean
So
group.
can I suggest something as
Yes.
as one of the other professionals on the board? Rich, I think I'm with you. More flexibility is better, but I think this is a two-edged sword. If we can also give staff guidance that of the ordinance requirements, and it's going to be up to staff to decide. We have a difficult site. It's not really possible to get all of them. What would we prioritize, all things being equal? If we were trying to give flexibility on the one hand, we also want to give some guardrails to staff to say, if we had to pick and they can only get 1 out of 5 key issues, would it be as proposed here to contain runoff, or would it be treatment, for instance? And so I think that might be the direction back to our staff, is to say, what would be the 5 pieces that you would be looking for a prioritization on, so then we can meaningfully know what that list is and say, we as a community think this is more important, treating the water is more important than holding the water, for instance. I know that there are other criteria, and I think that would be useful for us to make as a statement to staff, and it gives guidance to developers to know that if they're coming in, that's going to be the top priority, and that's the one they should concentrate on. And you know, they can not shoot in the dark.
You asked a minute ago, what are the problems? Now, so I'll give you a couple of problems.
Well, Jim, before you go through that and iterate, can I just get a comment back from staff if that would be useful to them and if they're able to do that?
Yes, it would be very useful to understand from the folks who are in working, trying to make these things work. You know, what from your perspective are the challenges of doing that? I think that's one of the biggest things we'd like to know is what are some of the challenges you've experienced already in making things work? So I guess it's twofold. One, what are the issues out there? And 2, what are the challenges that you found trying to make these things work, putting it together in different scenarios?
I think that's something that we can assign staff work, and we can assign the task force work to gather comments like from me, from any developers in the group, what Jim is going to also have in terms of his experience over the years in the areas and pull them all together and say, here's what we've seen as difficulties specific to McLean. And then they can tell us what the tools are that they would want to know how to prioritize out of that back to the task force.
No, okay, can I weigh in now?
Are we comfortable with that approach on that?
Yeah. I'm in Bryn Mawr, which we surround Bryn Mawr Park. And we're at the bottom of a teacup. All the flow comes down Tennyson Drive, Lindenhurst, Laughlin, and Emerson into Saucy Run. And it floods every moderate rainstorm at the bottom of Tennyson Drive. To my knowledge, there is no stormwater retention or control upstream of us. And so therefore, putting something in the plan to emphasize the problem needs to be solved and not, at least not exacerbated by the new development, I think is a requirement. We need to emphasize that we need to control this. It says here, receiving waters downstream of McLean should be protected by reducing runoff. Nothing, no more said. Saucy Run is eroding badly. That sounds like Trump, don't it? Anyway, Saucy Run is eroding, and there's been nothing done to prevent that from runoff or from rechannelization or whatever is necessary. And it's just a real problem down in the bottom of our neighborhood. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. So I think that's a good suggestion, Jack. And actually what I'd like to do is maybe follow up with you tomorrow and see if you wouldn't mind pulling individuals together. That way people can share their experiences with you. And as a group, maybe you could then share it, or you could share on behalf of a group with staff and the rest of us. Anyway, I'll follow up with you. Okay, so thank you very much for that, Joe. Appreciate your presentation, and we'll continue that discussion. I think we're almost there, but not quite. We've got less than 10 minutes or less than 15 minutes left. What I would really like to do is see if we can't finish off the rest of the first set of language. And then we'll start up our next meeting with heritage. So that is to say, we go back to the first section, pages 23 through 26. And so we can finish off that first section and let the staff work on the next iteration as we move on to the second set of language.
Kim, this is Jen. I wanted to, so last time we didn't get to public comment at the end of the meeting. So I wanted to note that with 10 minutes left, did you want to open the floor to, I know, I understand wanting to wrap up, but there are a number of folks on the line.
Let me take time to wrap this up, Jen, and then we can do some public, if there were public comments. Thanks for reminding me. Okay, any comments on 23, 24, 25, 26?
I'm on 23, Kim. This is Winnie.
All right, Winnie.
I've discussed this with staff, but I still have some second thoughts about this discouraged uses. If in fact we are a destination shopping and retail use, even though we are now expanding our residential, I'm concerned about single-use auto-oriented. You know, these guys have gas stations here. Granted, I wish they were somewhere else, but they are making money. I use them, and I bet you 90% of the people here on the in the meeting do. Drive-through lanes, I understand we might not want to do it in the center of town, but I don't know about the rest of you. It's been a long time since I have walked inside a bank. So I would, and you know, I would like to be able to continue to drive through, or if we have so many banks here, who knows which one's going to come next. Plus, you know, I'd like to drive through CVS too, to pick up a drug now and then. So I take exception to this language. It could be softened. It could be put into different, you could say, well, you can do it in the general and the edge, but you can't do it in the center. I'm open-minded about it, but I think that it is sort of a wrong way to look at what happens in downtown McLean. We can't give up our basic commercial being to having a nice place that looks better, a place to meet and so forth. We have to be able to combine them all.
Right. Well, I don't disagree with that. I guess with regard to the gas stations, they're here currently. They're not a new gas station that's going to be developed and buying space in McLean and moving in. So this is again future. And the notion of a drive-through CVS, well, that would be wonderful while I'm not feeling well or in COVID times, or a drive-through Starbucks, or a drive-through, you know, it's like, where do you stop? So, well, you can have value for a CVS, but maybe not. Do we really need a drive-through Starbucks? And are you going to then, you know, so I get what you're saying. I understand it all. You know, I don't know that we say that cannot be done. It's just not envisioned. And I would think that's probably a pretty basic statement, that it's not envisioned. Does it mean that it can't happen? No, well, it's just not envisioned.
I kind of disagree in a way, if you'll just bear with me for another sentence or two. No, I don't envision that 3 more gas stations are coming in here. Don't get me that. I don't think of it that way. Yeah. But I do envision that this town will continue to be a service, retail-oriented kind of place. If we don't want that, I didn't hear that anywhere up until now. So I think that while there may be some language, and staff and I talked a little about it, about changing this, I don't think it should be strongly put.
All right. So I see Jack and Rich. I don't know if that's with regard to this issue or something else.
Same issue.
All right.
I just think the language is really odd. I mean, it says in the first sentence that it's not envisioned, and then the very next sentence it says that these uses may be acceptable only when they are consistent with the desired building form or character of the area. I mean, what the heck is the desired building form or character of the area? I mean, does that mean you should allow a gas station at the intersection of Old Dominion and Cambridge Road because the character of the area is 3 gas stations? I mean, in all seriousness, it's just the language is inconsistent and it works against itself.
Rich, this is Liz. I think that is a little vague, but what's intended by that, and we have some examples in volume 1 of the urban design guidelines, but there's more urban ways to have drive-throughs or even gas stations. We've been working with some gas stations on Richmond Highway to put the building rather than the pumps closer to the street. Anyways, it's some things like that is what we're vaguely referencing here in terms of the desired building form and character. I admit it's a little vague, but the idea is that design guidelines will speak to that more clearly.
Right, but the way it's written here, that is very opaque. And I don't know.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll work on that language and clean it up a bit. Paul, did you have a question, comment?
No, I just wanted to stand behind Winnie. We're opposed to this entire section. This was supposed to be a revision based on community input. We are no input that asked for this sort of prohibition. We're opposed to what this does, which is to create an artificial monopoly for certain particular businesses in the CBC and to preclude, as Winnie says, a number of potential community serving retail establishments throughout the CBC. Again, we think the whole section should go.
Okay. Other comments, sections, again, 23, 24 through 26.
Yeah, I would agree with Paul and Winnie. And it's especially when it says are not envisioned as part of the long-term vision for McLean, for CBC. You can say, you can get to this a lot better in a lot more subtle way than just saying they're not envisioned. That's like saying my gas station is not an acceptable use downtown. And I don't go along with that.
All right. Other, thank you, Jim. Other comments with the rest of the section? Okay, I can't tell whose hand is up or left up from before, but I'm going to take that as no new suggestions. And
Sorry, I still had my hand up, if that's all right. I just had a quick question.
I'm sorry, Bob, go ahead.
On the bit about the pilot project, and I know it's something that we had touched on before, and the county staff had mentioned that they were going to provide us with some more information on what exactly they were thinking for the pilot project. So
yes.
I mean, I don't know if it's a conversation for today, but more just when are we going to be getting some more information on sort of what that plan is?
So that's a great idea, and because I think that fits also with this whole parking, back to parking, and because that's what they're talking about here with their or was this a different parking as I'm looking at this again, a different pilot project where they're
to be honest, I'm not quite, that's part of the question, is getting a little clarity on that. I can't tell, is this a project that's happening sort of between the curbs and it's sort of like on the road, or is this a project that's happening including sidewalks and trees and everything?
All right, Bob, go ahead. Bob.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the question. I can do this really quickly and just give you like a highlight of where some of the ideas that we're thinking of that we're still like developing as they come along. So there's actually five areas, and I'll do this really quick, Kim, and we can always talk about this next time as well. Is we're looking at within the road right away, Old Dominion and on Cambridge Road, is to reducing the lane widths from 11 to 14, where they are 11 to 14 feet wide, reducing them down to 10.5 feet wide. That's one thing. We're looking at providing on-street off-peak parking, which is taking the outside lane of Old Dominion as providing flex parking. So parking spaces on the street when it's not in the peak hours, like not in the morning rush hour or the afternoon rush hour. So that's a little bit more complicated to explore. So that's a lot of discussion with VDOT going on. We're also looking at moving the right turn lanes to reduce the curb-to-curb pavement widths. So a right turn lane adds an extra lane width. So that means that the cross section at the intersections is larger. So we're trying to reduce the cross section width of the road. That's also a discussion we're having with VDOT. And these are all preliminary ideas. So we're exploring the possibility of what if these things can happen. The other thing that we're looking at is reducing the speed limit on Old Dominion from 30 miles an hour to 25. And that would require a VDOT speed study. And then we're also looking at something I alluded to before previously, is that the center turn lane, the two-way left turn lane, look at areas where we can remove that, or keep that lane there, but actually it becomes a landscape median. So that's also, basically all of this is happening between the curbs on the roads. It's not outside the roads, behind the curbs. It's within the curbs on the roads. That's basically, those are the big 5 ideas that we have. So.
Okay, so a lot of ideas. Okay, I think what I'm going to do here, we can come back to these final pages to the extent that some of y'all have some other questions to raise. but to get to the public before we sign off for the evening. Okay, so Jen, are you, or Tim, maybe you are, I don't know who's coordinating public questions.
Yeah, so if any members of the public have a question, again, just open up the participants pane, and in the bottom right, you'll see the hand icon. Raise your hand. After you raise your hand, I can call on you.
All right, so Tim, should I be able to see these, or can you just call on them?
Yeah, I can call them. So far, nobody looks to have a question. Okay, we have one right here from Lori. Lori, I'm unmuting you right now.
Good evening, all, and I want to thank you all for what you're doing for McLean. It is clearly a lot of work. I'm just wanting to let you know that MPA is standing by and wanting to know how it is that we can be helpful as you discuss some of these discussions of common grounds and public art in particular. And if that's not an agenda item for tonight, I'm happy to call back in on a time that would be.
Hi, Lori. So public art is safe to say on the top of the agenda for a number of us who think this is a real opportunity for us to sort of brand the CBC with a fair amount of public art, and to figure out how we might facilitate more public art around the area. So we have inserted language in a number of places, and I think that is in our next section that we'll be tackling. But it is something that we're very focused on, and believe it will be a real benefit to the community.
Super, thanks. Look forward to participating again.
Thank you. All right.
Looks like that's it.
That's terrific. All right. Thank you all very much. And
Hey, Kim, when is our next meeting?
You see in the agenda, our next meeting, we've got 2 meetings. We're doing this every 3 weeks, by the way. So the next meeting, as you see on the agenda sheet, is August 10. The meeting after that, August 31. August 31 is not Labor Day weekend. It is the following, you know, in case anybody's going anywhere for Labor Day weekend this year. I'm just thinking, so you know. So the next 3 meetings we have tentatively, we'll send this out in a note to you all as well, our calendar appointments, August 10 and 31 and September 21. So it's essentially every 3 weeks. So I'll send out appointments for calendar appointments for everyone. All right, well, thank you all again. I appreciate all of your work in getting through all this. It's really important to do, and appreciate all your help and involvement. Thank you, and see you August 10th. And Tim, thank you for your help. Appreciate your work. Thanks.